In a sense, I think he does still have his fastball, but his fastball also comes with the fact that once in a while he's going to hit a guy in the head and load the bases with hit batsmen.
Let's bring on Charlie O'Connor, one of the great voices in hockey and certainly the preeminent voice on all things Philadelphia Flyers. We sang your praises and we reported, this is going to be a surprise to you, that John Tortorella has been fired. Pete said yesterday on the show, he was like, I hadn't considered the John Tortorella getting fired angle at all in Philadelphia. You're watching this team every day and covering them as they are sucking balls, so to speak. So were you considering it before those comments, or did this all happen really quickly?
Well, I think it was a very legitimate possibility they were going to move on from him at the end of the season. I was still probably leaning towards them keeping him. I think they may have been leaning towards keeping him too. But it was definitely a possibility that they were going to evaluate at the end of the season that they needed a new person at the top. The players were, for quite a while, players did not love playing under John Tortorella. I know that will come as a shock to you.
Massive bombshell.
But they were still playing hard. Really as recently as last week. You know, they lost 3 games last week, but they played Tampa Bay, Washington, and Dallas really tough. They took Dallas to overtime. They were playing solid hockey. They just didn't have the horses to score against really good teams. I do think that the start of this week, they lose 7-4 to the Blackhawks, the second worst team in the league. They lose 7-2 to the Toronto Maple Leafs in the center of the hockey world. And then the comments that John Tortorella made. Now, I was there. I was the one who asked the question that got Tortorella to go down that rabbit hole.
So it's your fault.
It's all my fault, actually.
You blew it up, Nikita Zadorov.
There we go. I, in the moment, didn't take them as badly as I think social media did, because to me, it played more that Tortorella was trying to kind of fall on the sword for his guys and basically say, this is on me. I need to do a better job, the way coaches do a lot. And he worded it very poorly. So I didn't take it the way a lot of people did, which was, I'm not interested in learning how to coach this team, and I'm not interested in learning how to coach a bad team. What I have to believe, though, is that in the wake of those comments, Tortorella had lots of conversations internally with general manager Danny Briere, with president of hockey operations Keith Jones, even with the chairman of the ownership group of Comcast Spectacor, Dan Hilferty, about this concept of, does he really want to be coaching a team that is going nowhere? I have to believe that after those discussions, that either John Tortorella came to the conclusion that he really doesn't want to do this, or the people above him came to the conclusion that they don't want him doing this anymore, because even if he's willing to try, they just don't think he's going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at, is like, I want to find out what's happened in the last 24 hours, because if like you said, if his words were just kind of clumsy and he didn't mean it the way that they came out in the terms of a direct quote, they would give him the opportunity to clarify those. And seemingly there was no intentions of doing that based off of the firing. So where do the Flyers go from here?
It's a fascinating question, and I really don't know. In the short term, they moved Bradshaw, who has done a really good job as assistant coach. He runs the defense, runs the penalty kill. They moved him up to interim head coach. So that's what's going to happen in the short term. The long term, though, very good question, because they built this organization really on the idea of a 3-man triumvirate of leadership, of John Tortorella as head coach, Keith Jones as president of hockey operations, Daniel Briere as general manager. John Tortorella predated both of those guys. He was the head coach starting in 2022. They brought in, Briere was in the organization, but he was kind of an advisor to the general manager. He didn't take over the GM job until 2023. Jones wasn't hired until 2023. And part of the reason why those guys were picked was because they wanted to keep John Tortorella. Dan Hilferty loved John Tortorella, and he felt like Briere was a good fit. He'd be able to work with Tortorella, and Jones wasn't going to come in and say, I need a new coach. I'm willing to take on John Tortorella as part of this job, because they thought that those 3 would work well together. Well, now one of the 3's gone. So I don't know what the leadership structure is going to look like with John Tortorella gone, because the entire leadership structure was created operating under the assumption that John Tortorella was going to be part of the leadership structure. So now they have to kind of, I don't think they're going to fire Briere or Jones, to be clear, but they have to kind of start from scratch in terms of how they want this to look, because they built this with John Tortorella in mind.
An important clarification to make in case anybody is confused. The interim coach's name is Brad, and his last name is Shaw. So every time we say Bradshaw, we are not just like, he's not one of our buddies. It's a tough name, says the guy named DJ Bean. Does John Tortorella still have his fastball? Because last season was very interesting. They were in the playoff picture and even top 3 in the Metro at the beginning of every month. And then they start to fall, and boy, oh boy, when they fell, did they crater. And then you have this season. So does he still have his fastball? We're going to get into where he could potentially fit, and it's a short list. But if you were a team that could use a John Tortorella type, would you want this version of John Tortorella right now?
Well, it's a really good question, because in a sense, I think he does still have his fastball, but his fastball also comes with the fact that once in a while he's going to hit a guy in the head and load the bases with hit batsmen. Like he has his fastball. Like the Flyers are a pretty good 5-on-5 team given the talent that they have on hand. They drive play. They control the scoring chance battle. The big reason why this team has been poor this year has been the goaltending. It's been the worst in the league, and it's dragged everything down. Also, they made big trades in the lead up to the deadline, trading away guys who were very popular in the room, and in the case of Scott Lawton, like the leader of the room. And I don't think the room has fully grasped how to handle that yet. So that's played a role in this part of the collapse. So I don't think it's all Tortorella's fault that the team is bad. However, it is part and parcel of the John Tortorella experience that he's going to rub a lot of guys the wrong way. And you have to, if you're looking to hire him, you have to sign up for the John Tortorella experience in full. You have to sign up for the fact that there's going to be some guys that he's going to decide just don't got it and is not going to play them and is going to put them in his doghouse, is going to scratch them, is going to bench them. You have to sign up for the fact that 3 or 4 times of the year, he's going to go up to the podium and say something absolutely bonkers that you're going to have to spend the next week dealing with the fallout from. You're going to have to deal with the fact that he's going to want power. He's going to want some degree of control over the roster. So does he have his fastball in the sense that he can coach a good system and that he can get a lot out of underwhelming rosters? Yeah, he does. But you also have to be willing to sign up for everything else that comes with John Tortorella.
Isn't that the full Tortorella experience?
Yeah,
like that's the story
good.
of everywhere he's been. And before we move on to like where he might go next, if he wants to continue coaching, I did want to ask, like, what's going to be the prevailing sentiment about the Tortorella era in Philadelphia? Because he was hired to lead them out of this rebuild. And the Flyers statement that they put out with the announcement of the firing was a lot about him restoring the culture of Philly and the Flyers. And we've talked about a bunch about that over the last couple of years, where like the Flyers finally kind of had their swagger back in terms of being a proud, no nonsense organization. And a lot of that does come back towards his fingerprints. But at the end of the day, he was hired to lead them out of the rebuild, and that never happened. So what's going to be the prevailing view on the Torts era in Philly?
I feel like a lot of that's going to come down to what happens over the next couple of years. Now, if the Flyers over the next 2-3 seasons develop into being a contender, I think his tenure will be looked at positively by most, because it'll be that, he did set the foundation. He got these guys, playing tougher hockey. He toughened them up, and then they were able to use that as a springboard to become a contender. Now, if the whole thing falls apart and this ends with, in a year, Danny Briere gets fired because the team is bad again, and they have to restructure the front office again after doing so just 2 years ago in 2023, then I think it's going to be looked at as a failure and a total waste of time, because you hired this guy to improve the culture, and then as soon as he leaves, the culture completely torpedoes. So right now, it's unclear, because so much of this is going to depend upon whether he's viewed as like the precursor to when things got good, or if he's viewed as he's the reason why the Briere rebuild didn't work.
A bright spot for the Flyers this year is that they got a 20-goal season out of Matvei Michkov as a rookie. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you grade John Tortorella's job of shepherding Matvei Michkov?
I don't think he did as bad of a job as a lot of fans do, because I do think that Michkov has improved, not leaps and bounds, and he's never going to be a two-way guy. He's never going to be a Mark Stone style winger, but he is showing a bit more commitment to not just cherry picking on every play and doing things that will allow him to not just be a offense only guy. And I think he will benefit from that in the long term, 3, 4, or 5 years down the line. That said, Tortorella's done a lot of things that have really ticked off fans. He's not playing Michkov nearly as much as the other guys in the Calder race are getting played. He's gotten scratched. He's gotten benched. Tortorella has not been as, I guess the best way to put it is he hasn't pumped Michkov's tires as much as the coaches of the other guys have. Again, a lot of this is going to depend upon what happens with Michkov. If Michkov becomes a superstar, and I think there's a very good chance he will, maybe 5, 6 years down the line, Michkov's going to get interviewed and he's going to say, yeah, I really benefited from that first tough year with John Tortorella. If Michkov goes the way of Nail Yakupov, then maybe people will say that he was ruined by John Tortorella. So it's so hard to talk about this now, because so much of how he's going to be viewed is going to be dependent upon how things play out 2, 3 years down the line. Right now, he's gone. And his tenure, I guess, in the here and now was a failure because he didn't take the team back to the playoffs. But I never really viewed him as the guy who was going to take them back to the playoffs. I always thought he was going to be kind of the bridge guy. But you can't evaluate the bridge until you see where the bridge leads to, if that makes sense.
Well, now it's time to turn on the carousel. Do you think that Torts coaches again? He's about to turn 67 years old. And if so, what is the mold of a team that John Tortorella would fit behind the bench on? Because it seems pretty clear at this point he does not want to coach a rebuilding team.
Well, here's what I'll tell you. When John Tortorella first took the job in 2022, we, as in the media, were allowed to go down to the locker room and meet with him kind of sort of off the record. And Tortorella, during that meeting with us, said that this is going to be his last head coaching stop. Philadelphia will be his last head coaching stop. Hilariously enough, a beat writer who no longer is a full-time beat writer for the Flyers actually tweeted that out. So again, this is supposed to be an off-the-record thing, and then he tweets it out. It's
Kevin Hayes' fingerprints all over it.
I guess it's no longer. I guess it's no longer off the record, really. But that was said by John Tortorella in 2022 that this was going to be his last stop. Now, he's a head coach. Maybe he just will have the itch and be like, "No, I don't want this to be my last stop. I want to show that I still got it, and that Philly was an awkward ending, and I want to do it again." That's very possible. I can't predict the future. If he's going to go somewhere else, though, I think it's got to be to a team that has the talent but needs a hard ass to kind of get the talent to start playing up to their ability. Buffalo being an obvious choice. Boston.
There you go.
Sean, chime in, brother.
I don't think people can see the sign if you want to read it.
The sign that is behind us says step 1, Lindy. Step 2, Torts. Step 3, question marks. Step 4, profit, baby. That is the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah, it's 100% the Buffalo. I heard some people say the Bruins. I'm sorry, guys. I don't think the Bruins have that much talent anymore.
Yeah, where's rebuilding the team? I just said he does not have an interest in coaching a rebuilding team.
Yeah, but the Sabres, on the other hand, they got talent. They just seem like they have no culture. That would be a fit. Now, whether he wants to do it or not, I don't know. But if he's gonna coach, I don't think any team that is a contender now is going to hire him, because they're not going to sign up for the Torts experience. And he's now made it clear that he doesn't really want to coach a team that is tanking or losing and playing out the string. That pretty much just leaves teams that are talented and should be better.
What about a couple of teams that have taken a step backwards this year, but have already had the Torts experience? Would a team like Vancouver or a team like New York go back and double dip, knowing what they know about John Tortorella and what that whole experience brings?
I cannot imagine a world where he goes back to Vancouver. That was such a mess. He didn't even live in Vancouver. He lived in the United States, and he had to like travel across the border every day. That was just a disaster of a situation from the jump. New York, look, the Rangers do crazy things all the time, so I can't rule out that possibility. Vancouver, though, nothing would shock me more than him popping back up in Vancouver. That would blow me away.
It would be the best.
Yeah, the list of teams is just short. And I honestly, this made me realize, because I was also trying to think, like, where would he go? Maybe like Nashville, something like that. But I don't think that many teams are going to fire their coaches this year. I think that a lot of the teams that have done it in season. And teams that have done it with great success. Detroit does it, and they get their next actual guy. St. Louis does it, gets their next actual guy. Boston will be looking for a real solution there. I can't imagine Torts would be interested in that, but who knows? Maybe pride thing, come back home. That could maybe tie into it.
The power struggle between, if Neely and Sweeney are still there, the power struggle between Neely, Sweeney, and Torts would be it would be a disaster.
It would be a circus. And I do agree with you that, with both of you, that the talent isn't there to do it. And then after that, like Chicago, but that would be doing exactly what it would be, arriving where he kind of arrived in Philly, which is next step time, please. And I don't know if maybe he was just sick of it in that moment, because a lot of people, when they tire of jobs, they're like, you know what, I don't want to do anything like this ever again. But really, if you did a similar thing just with different people and a fresh coat of paint on it, you'll feel a little better. Mm-hmm. So maybe Chicago, but
I don't think so.
I don't know about all that.
Kirk in the chat says Anaheim. Like, Anaheim would be a very interesting one, because they do have the talent. They're sort of rebuilding, but I think that that's a team that would fit the characteristics of a team that would be looking for a Torts type.
Torts, I'm firing my coach if I'm Anaheim.
Torts and Zegras seems like a match made in heaven, he said with heavy sarcasm.
Maybe it's what he needs, though.
I was going to say, I remember at the beginning of the season, Petey threw out the idea that maybe a guy like John Cooper would be approaching retirement. And if I know you're talking about like firings, but if someone like that decided they were done with it, maybe, or like a Paul Maurice if they won another Stanley Cup, that situation like that, I think.
And I mean, that would be the ultimate. That's a going back to an old team that I think all parties would be interested in. He went there, he won there. That's where my vision of John Tortorella still is the crazy Lightning coach. So yeah, won a cup there.
I know. Hadn't even considered the Cutter Gauthier of it all. If he went to Anaheim, that would be unbelievable. So that's my pick. I want him to co-coach the Ducks.
Oh, that would be the best. I'm not firing Cronin if I'm the Ducks.
There's been a lot of smoke around
maybe
that whole situation.
Yeah, I feel like there's been smoke around that though forever. Yeah.
It would be funny going the Ducks way. Like, the Ducks are an old school team. They have that, like, you know, the people at the top, like the Torts types. It would be funny, though, given the fact that everything you hear about Cronin is that all the players hate him. And if they fire Cronin to bring in Tortorella, it's like, be careful what you wish for.
Honestly, though, that's like the perfect situation for Torts. It's like, the only way that I can be liked by my players is if I follow up a guy who is universally disliked by all the players.
He kept the seat warm for him.
That's right.
He got it all ready. Charlie, you are the best. Thank you so much for coming on with us. We know that this is going to be an extremely busy day for you. We will obviously continue to read you and follow you as we try to figure out what is going on with these Philadelphia Flyers. I have hope for the future, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, guys.
We all silly like the mayor.